Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into something pretty fascinating. What happens when we try to read ancient texts with our totally modern minds? We're going to uncover three really common traps that cause us to completely miss the point of words written thousands of years ago. And we're going to start with one of the most famous verses of all time. You have seen this verse everywhere, right? It's on coffee mugs, posters, athletes write it on their gear. It's one of the most popular, powerful, and, motivating verses in the entire Bible. It just feels like this incredible promise that with enough faith, you can do anything. No task is too big, no mountain too high.
But what if that feeling, that sense of unlimited personal power, isn't actually what the author was trying to say at all? What if we've basically lifted this one line out of its story, and in doing that, we've accidentally changed its entire meaning? This is the perfect way to start thinking about how we read these ancient words.
Okay, so the first big trap we fall into is what happens when a word travels through time. See, words aren't static things. They're not set in stone. Their meanings shift and stretch and sometimes completely flip over centuries. And we get caught in this trap when we just assume a word means the same thing to us today as it did 2,000 years ago.
There's actually a technical term for this. It's called semantic anachronism. It's basically the mistake of plopping a modern definition onto an ancient word. I like to think of a word as a little time traveler. And on its journey to the present day, it picks up all sorts of new meanings, new baggage. And assuming it still means what it did way back at its origin, that's a huge mistake.
Now, this slide gives us a perfect, almost funny example of this in action. In one of his letters, Paul encourages people to be a hilarion giver. Now, our modern ear immediately hears the English word hilarious. And believe it or not, I've actually heard people suggest this means we should be laughing hysterically when we give money. But the Greek word hilarion, it just meant cheerful or generous. So God wants a cheerful giver, not necessarily a stand-up comedian.
Okay, here's a much more serious example of how this time-traveling baggage can really change everything. When we use the word hope today, it's usually got a bit of uncertainty baked in, right? Like, I hope it doesn't rain. But in the New Testament, the Greek word for hope most often means a confident certainty, something you could literally stake your entire life on. So a line about the hope of salvation suddenly shifts from wishful thinking to a rock-solid guarantee. The whole feel of the text just completely changes.
All right, let's dive into our second trap. And this one is all about grammar. It's not just the words that change. The whole structure, the entire feel of a language can be different. English verbs, for example, are obsessed with time, past, present, future. But ancient Greek verbs, they were often way more concerned with something else, perspective.
And this is where this parade analogy it nails it. I want you to imagine a huge parade going down the street. That same event can be viewed in two totally different ways, and Greek verbs let a writer switch between those perspectives. They're basically choosing how they want you to see the action.
So first you've got the helicopter view. This is like the Greek aorist tense. You're way up high, looking down, and you can see the entire parade from start to finish. You're not focused on the little details of any one float. You're just seeing the whole event as one big completed action. It's the summary, the big picture.
Now let's land that helicopter and stand on the street corner. This is like the Greek present tense. You're right there in the thick of it, watching the floats and the bands go by, one by one. You're experiencing the parade as it unfolds in the moment. A writer uses this tense to zoom in, to bring your focus to the internal details of what's happening.
So the really crucial thing here is to avoid these simplistic, easy rules. You might read in a study guide that the aorist tense means a once-and-for-all action, but a lot of the time it's just the default tense, kind of like the default font on your computer. It doesn't always carry some deep extra meaning. And likewise, the present tense doesn't always mean a continuous, non-stop action. Sometimes it's just the author's way of waving a flag and saying, hey, pay attention to this part.
And that brings us to our third principle, which honestly ties everything else together. We've seen how individual words and even grammar can be tricky, but they only really show their true meaning when we look at the single most important thing, literary context.
This analogy is just so perfect. I mean, think about it. Nobody rents a movie, fast forwards to the middle of scene 17, watches for 2 minutes, and then claims they understand the whole film. It would be totally absurd, right? You'd have no idea who the characters are, what the plot is, what's at stake. And yet this is often exactly what we do with ancient texts. We grab one sentence and completely ignore the story it's a part of. So let's circle all the way back to our original mystery.
Now that we know how important context is, what's the actual movie plot happening around Philippians 4:13? What was going on in scenes 15 and 16 that gives scene 17 its real meaning?
Well, if you just back up a few sentences, the answer becomes incredibly clear. Paul is talking about contentment. He literally says he has learned the secret to being content, whether he has a lot or a little, whether he's well-fed or hungry. That is the context. So the everything he can do isn't run a marathon or ace a final exam. The everything is to stay content and faithful in every possible circumstance, the good and the bad, through the strength he gets from Christ. It's about endurance, not about unlimited personal achievement.
Okay, so now that we have our toolkit, we're thinking about word history, grammar, and context. Let's put it to the test on another famously tricky word from the Bible, flesh.
The Greek word is sarx, and when we hear flesh in English, we often think of our physical bodies, usually with this negative, sinful spin on it. But just look at this slide. The word had this huge range of possible meanings. It could mean literal flesh and blood, your entire body, your family or ancestors, or, and this is the really interesting one, it could refer to all of humanity in its weakness, trying to live apart from God, a whole way of life.
So when Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, contrasts living by the flesh with living by the Spirit, he's not saying your physical body is evil. The context makes it clear he's talking about a whole orientation of life. The flesh is the entire self, body, and spirit, trying to get by on its own power, relying on this world's resources, and because of that, it's susceptible to sin. It's a worldview, not just a body part.
So, when you put this all together, you can start to see how paying attention to these different areas helps us read these ancient texts with completely new eyes. We can move from just seeing words on a page to really starting to understand the author's world.
So, here are the 3 big takeaways. First, always remember that words are time travelers. They have a history. Second, grammar isn't just about rules. It has a feel. It directs your perspective. And finally, and most importantly, context is king. A sentence without its story is just a string of words.
And all this really leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. If a verse as famous and as beloved as Philippians 4:13 is so widely misunderstood, what else have we been reading with our modern eyes? What other big ideas, concepts, and verses are just waiting there to be rediscovered if only we learn to read just a little more carefully?